Hello, my name is Dr. David Fletcher, and I want to welcome you to the mini lecture that we've set up so that you can enjoy understanding more about the neurothermal. My exciting time with you, I hope it will be exciting, is that we get a chance to really do, as we say on this front slide, the deep dive into thermal scanning using the neurothermal. This is something that I love to do, which is share my experience and my knowledge that I have gained over my entire career of looking into instrumentation as it relates to the subluxation. For those of you who know me, I am the president and owner of CLA. And for those of you who may not know me, I have a fellowship in sports sciences as well as my chiropractic degree. And it has led me down a path of where I've been involved in research, affiliated with the development and investigating the association of instrumentation as it relates to the objective findings and the minute changes within the neurological systems as they relate to the subluxation. So it's with great pleasure that I get a chance to work with you today and share with you some of that knowledge and certainty. So the purpose as we go into the session today is to understand the why, the how, and the when of thermal scanning in an active community chiropractic practice. That's critical. I've been in active practice for over 30 years, as I said, and enjoyed the value of looking at many, many different systems to the point where I fell in love with the insight technologies as I introduced them many, many years ago in my practice. My journey took me to the point where I now lead the company and own the company. So I feel very comfortable and very honored to have a chance to share with you some of those iterations that I have understood as I use and now promote and encourage people to use the insight in their practice. So let's get started. Let's really start to take a look at what it is that we want to understand about using instrumentation. We ask ourselves the questions, how are we or you objectively measuring the impact of the subluxation, not only on their spine, but on their health and their function and their human potential? This is one of the reasons that we have to really understand not only the impact on the upper layers of the subluxation, which would be the neuromuscular area and the structure itself, but the processing of the regulatory nervous system deep within the neurodural core. Many times what we're taught in school is that the neurology affiliated with, a manipulation and adjustment or the subluxation or a fixation even in the spinal region is associated mostly with the IVF outward. But what we want you to recognize is the relationship that we have with the IVF inward. Certainly as we start to take a look today, especially at the association of thermography, we're looking at the IVF outward and inward, if you would, because we're taking a look at the thermography as it relates to the vasodilation, vasoconstriction phenomenon in the skin. But we're going to take that a step further as we start to take a look at the interactions of the sympathetic tone in the regional relationship of the different organ systems, glands, and blood vessels as we described. How are you objectively delivering that information to your patients? Is one thing to touch and tell and feel the tone within the tissues of the subluxated area, but it's another thing to look much deeper. And how are you then developing care plans using the functional neurological data? Again, many times we're associating our care plans with how do you feel, we anticipate the function returning, but now you have an objective way of measuring and looking deeper. So, as you know, the insight is the name that was given to the subluxation station. It was the insight subluxation station. And the insight subluxation station was developed so that we could look at the neuromuscular or the motor systems through EMG, through the regional sympathetics, through the thermal scan, which we're going to do a deep dive on today, and through the heart rate variability that's affiliated with the global impact of having the entire sympathetic system out of balance. We add into that inclinometry that looks at dyskinesia, and we look at the sensory relationships, if we so choose, with algometry. So what we're looking at is a complete array of neurofunctional testing using the insight. We combine, and I think this is the genius of the insight, is that all of them can be used through the similar software. You can go down whatever path you choose. If you're looking at sports and performance, many times you want to have range of motion affiliated with many of the details that you're looking at, or even algometry if you're doing PI. But one of the things that we know is that the core score, which we're not going to highlight today, we're really looking at neurothermal, but the core score is the combination of the EMG, this thermal that we're talking about, and the HRV. And it has become, a professional standard now with thousands and thousands of offices worldwide using the core score. And it's a way in which you can use a single scoring system to give information that's associated with this thermal scoring along with EMG and the HRV. So one of the things that we know we want you to participate in is this purpose of using the thermal scan is to look deeper. Just what I said, it's great to palpate the tone. It's wonderful to use X-ray to look at the end stage challenges that a person has had within their structure, but you want to look at the functional nervous system. And I included a baby in here because you want to have a non-invasive, simple strategy to start looking at that. So when I was putting together the slide deck, one of the things that I really wanted to do was just get this reliability situation out of the way, because even when BJ introduced this whole idea of thermal scanning back in the 1920s, that is, to the chiropractic profession, it was a bone of contention as to how accurate it was and how reproducible it was. And we're going to go into some of the studies that have been done, and thermography has been studied tremendously within chiropractic. It's starting to really gain an enormous amount of traction within the medical profession, looking at the pathogenic side of thermography. But we in chiropractic use it to look at what is known as the salutogenic or vitalistic side, because we're looking at a living nervous system adapting through its ability to manage itself. And we really go back to this idea of why we use the understanding of thermography or the other neural instrumentation. And I think Fred Bard said it best, is that, that when we're taking a look at the cause of all disease, if you will, at the end stage, is the inability of the body to interpret itself and adapt to its environment. And of course, what we're really looking at is the deeper stages of maladaptation as that person has progressive subluxation challenges. It changes their sympathetics, and we can measure that. So the intra and inter-examiner reproducibility of paraspinal thermography is critically important. If you're going to use an instrument, you have to know its validity and reliability. And so we need to know that it is a reproducible data point. And so one of the things that you need to understand is that when we're taking a look at the validity, which is associated with the subluxation, we're looking at how patterns are affiliated with this entire relationship of the ability of the body to stay in symmetry in managing its thermal regulation. And we'll go into that much more in the later stages. What we're talking about here is, can you do an examination one time and get reproducible results the next time? Can you do an examination by one examiner and have it reproducible by the other? The conclusion indicates this completely, is it revealed excellent intra-examiner and inter-examiner reproducibility of paraspinal thermography using a commercially available unit. And you need to understand that that was associated with the Insight system. So you can see that that was above. So I want you to understand that this was testing that was done by chiropractors in a clinical setting. They did 100 subjects, and these are skilled examiners, and they went through the rigorous process of looking at the kappa associated with the interclass coefficients and the concordance correlation coefficients, which means that they were looking at the statistical relevance of it, and they came to the conclusion that it revealed excellent intra and inter-examination reliability. And that's a key for what we want to move forward with. So why use temperature? And I think it's really important to understand the physiology of what is known as paraspinal cutaneous temperature, or PCT. So the most important theoretical background of using skin thermography is that the distribution of the body heat in a normal body is symmetrical. That means that in a healthy state, the skin temperature patterns will change, but they'll be within symmetrical limits. So it's really important to know what the normative or standard limits are. And if you go outside of those, and we're going to use an introduction of the studies that indicate what those standard deviations are, you can start to determine whether there is mild, moderate, or severe distortion in the ability to regulate that symmetrical control. So vertebral subluxations represent thermal asymmetries that are associated with the patterns. Why? Because in the understanding of the subluxation, not only do we have a sensory and motor effect, we have a sympathetic effect. And when you have dysautonomia, you're associated that with the sympathetic motors, and we'll go into that a bit more. Specific levels of asymmetry are not necessarily considered the levels of the subluxation, but we do associate, as we'll teach you more, the connection between observing pattern, observing the amplitudes, observing what we call clumping and crescendoing within these thermal patterns. So it's very exciting to know that we have technologies that you can run within seconds on any age of patient and understand that they are autonomically controlled, or whether they are working through sympathetic asymmetries, which you as a chiropractor, by the way, can control magnificently with your adjustments. So paraspinal thermographic scanning is associated with the body's ability to maintain the symmetry, but where does that symmetry come? It's associated with the vasoconstriction, vasodilation phenomenon, which is mediated by the sympathetic motor preganglionic signals. So as we've said, dysautonomia is associated with the subluxation. If you interfere at a spinal level with the sympathetic preganglionic motor signals, then what you're going to get is that you're going to get dysautonomia, and we can measure that using the unique normative ranges that exist at each level. So you need precision instrumentation, and this is where I get a chance to really proudly show off the Insight NeuroThermal. It's a thermopile sensor array. So we use, as you can see now, the two heads. So we're looking paraspinally at the left side and the right side, and you can migrate those heads to accommodate the size of an infant and newborn, or you can spread them wider to work through an adult array. You arrange them paraspinally so that you're looking on either side of the spinous processes. We start at S1 and we track all the way up to C2 and then C1 left and C1 right. And so we are able to run an entire scan, if you will, in about 25 seconds on an adult. And what we allow is that, as we're going to show you, that there are two types of scanning you can do. You can choose to do the rolling thermal, as we said, which tracks through the rolling wheels on the patient's spine, the distance, and then it calculates what levels have been scanned. Or you can go in and specifically choose the levels you want to scan in something called segmental scanning or segmental thermal scanning. So it's a very versatile instrument. So these are the rolling thermal options, and you can see on the left that we have a line graph which starts at S1 and allows us to track all the way up to C2, and then we are able to be prompted to go C1 left and C1 right. And you can see that in this combined graph, and we'll go into that a little bit later, it then plots the amount of amplitude that's affiliated with it. And you're going to see that we have two other graphs on either side of this, which are referring to the vertical temperature relationship, whereas the symmetry is looking from the side to side. And again, as I said, we'll be viewing that. What we're looking at here is the second option, which is segmental scanning, used very successfully in pediatrics, hence the use of the scanner on a beautiful little boy here. And what we also can show you is that the ease of using this new wireless technology is that it's very maneuverable in and around small children and otherwise. I need you to understand that unlike EMG, thermal scanning is used in a non-postural way. So you can have the patient seated. There was a study that was done looking at the differentials between a standing and a prone thermal scanning. They are identical, so you do not need to worry. You can place the patient in a prone position. In babies, many times what we'll do is support that baby over our lap and roll or segmentally scan the segments in that child. And so it's an entirely versatile system for the way in which you can collect that scan. So why use temperature? Well, we need to understand a little bit of the physiology of this paraspinal cutaneous temperature. The regional sympathetic neurological system controls the cutaneous microcirculation, as I said before, through this vasoconstriction and vasodilation phenomenon. Now, what you need to know, and this is kind of cool, is that a sensitive innervation site corresponds to a microvascular region, as sympathetic fibers also follow along sensitive fibers in the same nerve. So although we, in the subluxation modeling, are not looking at pain-based patterning, we're looking at function-based patterning, you should understand that a tremendous amount of research has been done that associates with the pain-based modeling of thermography as well. And I've thrown in a study a little bit later that talks about L5 and the discal relationship. There is a direct connection, and you should know this, with thermography as it relates to people that have pain-based patterns affiliated with sciatica, pain-based patterns affiliated with discal disease and or change at certain segmental levels. What we're going to focus on primarily is the association of the entire functioning regional sympathetic motor nervous system from S1 through to C1 being in pattern or out of pattern. But you should understand that thermography can be used to localize different relationships, even associated with sensitive pain patterns. So let's talk about what a sympathetic motor nerve does. It exits out of along with the spinal nerve, and it has a neurotransmitter that is activated, which is the norepinephrine, and that causes vasoconstriction. And I put this in here because this effect is strong in the skin, the digestive tract, and the kidneys themselves. And in these organs, normal blood flow greatly surpasses that required to keep the tissues alive. And so this is a functional feature, and in the skin, it's a functional feature used for thermal regulation. So that's really critically important. It's an entirely sensitive system that associates with the long-term ability of the body to thermally regulate. And if you interfere with the function of that sympathetic motor nerve, you can detect it by looking at the ability to thermal regulate. Hence the value of doing thermal scanning to look deeper at the functional neurology that's associated with the end organs. So you need to understand that at the PCT level, nerves control the skin arterioles through the smooth muscles. Sympathetic motors, and we discussed those sensory afferents, control that vasoconstriction and vasodilation. But unlike many structures, arterioles do not have dual innervation by both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So there's no modulation at the spinal cutaneous region by the parasympathetic control. So as we take a look at the global set points, say using HRV, we're looking at a completely different relationship associated with the control mechanisms of the global versus regional. HRV looks at the global set point between the sympathetic and parasympathetic because it's looking at an organ, the heart beating, that has controls in both. The skin temperature regulation only has the sympathetic neurology in those smooth muscle intimas that are affiliated with the blood vessels warming and cooling the skin. So here's what goes on, is that if the sympathetic motors are causing vasoconstriction through the release of norepinephrine, then the reduction of the sympathetic tone, if you have reduced sympathetic tone, that allows vasodilation. There happens to also be a local synthesized vasodilator substance known as nitrous oxide, which is associated with all tissues. And when you start to lose that natural regulatory control, nitrous oxide kicks in as well locally, and you get this sympatho-inhibitory role of nitrous oxide. So this is why it's so cool, because we get a chance to look at the sympathetic motors that are affiliated with this relationship between vasoconstriction and its association of being inhibited, which causes the vasodilation, with the response also of the nitrous oxide. So that's wonderful to know how our body systems are working. Let's look at the practicality of getting good scans over and over again. So these are questions you have to ask yourself. And did the patient exercise immediately prior to the examination? Now, we at CLA recommend a 3-hour latency period before that time window. So, if you are setting up a schedule, if it's an initial exam, and that's a little bit with your staff mentioning over the phone, we're going to be doing very detailed neurological scanning of your body's nervous system. Please refrain from smoking or doing detailed or active exercise within a 3-hour window of you getting scanned here. Where they're in our climate up in Toronto here and in the northern climes, we have heated seats. And so, if we're going to be doing the scans, we remind them to not use the heated seat on their way into the office for that examination. Why push the limits when we're going to do acclimation within the office anyways? Have they come from an exceedingly hot environment? It's going to take them to cool off a little bit more, and vice versa. Or, are we going to come from a very cool environment? So we have to take that into account. Have they been overheated? Did they just come in out of a very, very hot climate into your office? Watch your office environment. This is a very big one. We find that many times two things happen is that they may set up the scanning environment, if it's in the exam suite, with a cooling vent or heating vent directly over the examination area. Please try and remove that. I know in my office, I actually blocked the air vent that was coming down on that. We had two, so it didn't keep the room, it kept it at room temperature, climate controlled. But you may need to just move the environmental area where you're doing your scanning away from the direct overhead impact of some of that cooling or heating of the HVAC. The other thing to do is that computers, laptops especially, generate a tremendous amount of heat. And many times we'll keep the scanning instruments close to that. Please remember to keep them away from the blowing fan of where the heated computer would be, so that you're not starting out with sensors that have to acclimate themselves to the environment as well. We have to make sure that the equipment is properly synced, and we're going to go into that a little bit later. The hair on the skin, well, we can't do much about that, but this glabrous versus non-glabrous skin, we have to recognize, especially as we're coming into the upper cervical region, that we're not shooting into the hair region. So please, if you're doing with longer-haired women, let's get the hair off their back. Take a disposable either hair clip or a disposable hair elastic and have them tie their hair up to get the hair off of the skin and to try and move it away as far as you can from the C2, C1 region. Any blemishes, obviously, if they have an active skin lesion that's on there, you need to make note of that either in the notes or otherwise, because it could cause a hyperemic event that's local to one side. And tattoos. Well, we know that tattoos do change the function of the vasodilation, vasoconstriction phenomenon. Again, making note of that. Please have the patient not having itched or scratched themselves beforehand. These are kind of obvious points, but we want to make sure that we're getting a very clean, reproducible inter-examination response. Acclimation time. Well, there's been tremendous studies that are done on acclimation time as it relates to the ability of the local skin to go from hyperemic or to hypothermia to acclimate to this. And what we have found, and you can see in the McCoy study, and they happen to be specifically using the Insight, is the time it took for the subject to put on a gown, wait their turn to enter the room, and for the examiner to enter them into the database prior to being scanned served as the equilibrium period. And that's really important to know, because in day-to-day practice, some of the earlier studies were indicating that you needed anywhere up to 16 minutes. That's just not the case. The truth of it is that anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes for acclimation time is an absolutely adequate amount of time. So our recommendation is because it is an open-backed exam, is that you do have the patient put on an open-back gown, is that you then, before the whole procedure of putting them into the computer or checking and getting the examination set up, if you happen to be doing multiple exams, have them in an open-back gown. I do ask you, if they're wearing pants, especially men, that you can have them release the belt and pull down away from the S1 region so that S1 is able to acclimate as well. I want you to be absolutely sure that if you do have the option, for instance, to do an HRV scan beforehand, you may choose to do that ahead of time. But as Dr. McCoy found in his study, just the acclimation time of them having an open gown while you input them into the computer and get yourself set up to do the scan is usually adequate enough. I threw this in just at the start because we're going to go into some studies and some other things. This was a study by Roy out of the Quebec Trois-Rivières School, and it was paraspinal cutaneous temperature modifications after a spinal manipulation at L5. It's a relatively recent study. They did a sham group, and they actually did this one in manipulation, and they did a follow-up, and they did another one using activator. And they did the sham group, and it showed that there was no significant temperature modification, so it didn't do anything. But when they did do the treatment group, and I like the concept of treatment and manipulation versus adjustment group, significant differences were noted on both sides. And it showed that the lumbar spine spinal manipulative therapy is noticeable by PCT at L5. Well, that comes as no surprise to us, but I want you to have the confirmation that if you're using, a hands-on manual model of adjusting the subluxation, and you may, associate it with SMT, that you are going to get deeper changes within the functioning autonomic nervous system when you use that system. They call it SMT. We can look at the impact of the SMT as it relates to the subluxation through pattern. So I put in the sort of standard Umatsu, which was a two-part series out of Johns Hopkins. This came in the late 80s. And what you have to understand is that Umatsu and his team were looking at the normal values and reproducibility of thermographic scanning as it associated with the various levels. And they were brilliant because what they were doing was looking at the standard deviations, which we then used as standard deviations in our normative database. So when you go to scan somebody, you're using the Umatsu Johns Hopkins standard deviations. And if you take a look at the table view, you'll get to see that they're a little different at each level and even on each side as we go up. And that's really critical because these became the normative standards in the medical and or chiropractic modeling of looking at delta T. And it's critical that you understand that this is embedded in our software so that we're looking at delta T through the standard deviations of 1, 2, or 3, mild, moderate, or severe standard deviations. And that's a really important point because standard deviations are statistically calculated based upon what has been found to be reproducible data here. And you can see normal values and reproducibility. So the reproducibility was phenomenal in this study, and it set the stage for what has become, as I said, the gold standard in this process of scanning people. Thermography, low back pain, and sciatica. Umatsu then took it to the next level. Again, they're looking through the medical lens here, but they did a part 2, and it was the application of low back pain and sciatica. And so you'll notice that they took, in this case, 144 patients who had the combination of low back pain and sciatica, and they noticed that they were highly significant thermal asymmetries. And you need to understand that those thermal asymmetries were associated primarily with vasoconstriction or cooling being noted on the pain-based side. And so when these asymmetries exceeded one standard deviation from the mean in 90 normal control subjects, the positive predictive value of using thermography in detecting nerve root impingement was 94.7%. Temperature asymmetry is particularly effective in evaluating patient populations with low back pain and sciatica. And again, our goal at CLA is to look much, much deeper than that and look at the subluxation as it relates to just not a local impact, but also at the global impact of the deepening problems that go from that same sciatic nerve bundle into the autonomic functions that associated with perhaps the digestive core, lower digestive core, and even associated with the reproductive core. And so I need you to understand that when you're looking at the sympathetic motors, you have the ability to track not only localized symptomatology, which is neurologically based, but also look deeper into the end organ. And that's what the Umatsu study indicated, that in study 1 was that there was this associative end organ relationship affiliated with looking at these standard deviations. And this was only one standard deviation. That would be the green plotting on a thermal graph. Think about the impact on that patient's health if it was affiliated with those reds and blues as it goes deeper and deeper into more than one segment. So we also know that you can do pre and post. This was published by Mahaffey. After they did, it happened to be a torque release adjustment. There's a 30-minute latency. I don't think you can see the time stamp as it goes, but there's 30 minutes between the one on the left and one on the right. You can see that pre and post adjustments, there is a tremendous opportunity to look at what happens in this. And with the new thermal scanner and the current software that we have, it becomes this remarkably flexible system so that you can have a laptop in your exam room, certainly, but also you can take a laptop and you can bring this directly into an adjusting area and do pre and post scanning, which becomes remarkable after this. It's such a versatile system. And, if you are an upper cervical doc, you're going to be able to look at the vertical directs and compare delta as well as do segmentals. So it's highly useful in so many different applications. But once you get them, you have to start to report the thermal results. And I just love this picture because you can see, this happens to be Dr. Jay Fortier who's showing it. And what we're seeing is that he's able to show the entire family where they are, under care or where we would recommend care. And we're going to show in the bottom picture a little bit more the value of using the software as it takes it one step deeper into what we call the Neuralink. So from a patient education tool, they get a chance to make the connection between the nerve bundles that are in the spine, how they are affected on that particular scan, and how we can click through one next layer deeper into the variety of organs and show them the abstracts of the research that shows how chiropractic care in a subluxation-centered model has been shown to resolve many of the common challenges that parents and or children or adults who have subluxations are affected with and who are benefited under care. This is rolling thermal when we go to interpret and show. You can see on the left, this is a combined neurothermal graph. And so what we have is an ability to show the amplitude. So in this case, on the far left, the amplitude has been calculated as the patient has been scanned along the spine from S1 through C1. We have two settings that you can use. We recommend you use the standard setting, which is where you click on S1 and you roll it up to L1. You click it there. You roll up to T1, click it there. You roll to C2, click it there. It prompts you to go left C1 and right C1. Why? Because now we've created more accurate measurements between S1, L1, L1, T1, T1, C2. And that means that we can calculate a little more accurately the length of that patient's spine, especially when we're looking at smaller children or adults. However, it comes with a little bit of a risk in reproducible scans. And that is that the examiner has to be assured that they know where S1, L1, T1 are, and we'd like you to make sure that you're clicking in those patients. And, since you're doing 12 visits, between, it's not like you can put a mark and do it again at the same time unless you're doing pre and post. So the realities is that if you're off a little bit, it can skew the results. What we've done is we've put in what we call a basic setting, which you can do on your configurations. And what we can do is for newer scanners, or if you feel you're not satisfied with getting those exact landmarks done, you can just click it at S1 and C2 and bypass the L1 and T1. It's good, especially if you're learning for it. It does take away the accuracy of breaking it into some of these. If you're doing pattern work, as you can see in the middle, you can do that on the basic very comfortably. You'll notice that the line graph on the right-hand side, or what we call the combined graph, is really a representation a little bit differently of what you see between the two others. And you can see that it's the tracking line, but it is filling in where the amplitude is showing it. I want you to take note here is that the one on the right, which is the thermal graph we have, and I've done a little blow up of it here, shows, instead of bars, shows the actual data that is being plotted. you need to understand that when we are running, this is the accuracy of the thermal scanner, of the neurothermal. When we are running a scan from S1 up to C2, C1, you're getting up to 24,000 infrared readings. We're collecting approximately 1,000 infrared images per segment. That's an enormous amount of data, and that's why we have such great accuracy in the neurothermal. And then when we plot this data, and believe me, you need to understand how detailed it is to plot it, but how detailed it is to process that amount of data. We get these elegant scans that anybody can understand. And so you have the ability to look at the amplitudes, as you see here, in a bar graph fashion, or the line graph that still colorizes it as we go forward. So this is what I want to discuss is NCM, or neurocalorimetric. This is the classic standard ability for us to look at a thermal scan. Most of you use this, what we call the bar graph, or the NCM. NCM is looking at a horizontal analysis, and it's associated with what we talked about in the very first slides, that's affiliated with the theory or the premise that the inability of the sympathetic motor nervous system, or the entire autonomic nervous system, called dysautonomia, can occur if there is asymmetry. This person has tremendous asymmetry affiliated with many, if not most levels. The white represents those within the normative standard deviations. Green indicates a 1 standard deviation. Blue indicates an extension of 2 standard deviations. And we see the red as being 3 standard deviations and above. And what you need to understand is that not only does this person have a singular active area of their spine, but they have all of these different clumps. And we can then not only look at clumping, which you can see, for instance, from C1 down, let's be comfortable with this, through C4, that's a clump of neural distortion that's going on. And we also see the ability of something called crescendoing. And so if you look at the clump that's associated from T7 through T9, you can start to see that there are varying crescendos of this. Well, this is really important, and I'll show you a little bit more as we go through it. But if you take a look at this clumping that we see, clumping is a phenomenon that is associated with part of the neurology of linking segments together. In other words, when we get one segment being subluxated, it's likely that it's triggering a spillover effect through the recurrent meningeal nerve, which is associated with going anywhere from 2 to 3 segments above and below. And so we can literally look at the deepening effect of a local subluxation as it goes to clump or spill over. And we can look at the maturity of it as we look at crescendoing, because as it spills over, we many times are going to see this crescendo going below it and above it. It gives us a chance to localize where the apex of this scan clumping is associated with the crescendo and the clumping. So that's something for you to recognize and realize as you're taking a look at where this potential localization of the subluxation is. We also are able to do a vertical analysis. And this is a very interesting phenomenon that our plotting happens. On the combined graph, this is something called dermathermograph. And it allows us to look at each level of temperature as it relates to S1. So we chose a constant, which is the temperature of S1, and measured vertically every segment on the left and every segment on the right, and plotted it against the normal center line. Let me show you something. I'm going to go back a moment. Back a moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look. These are not the same scan, so I'm just using this for demonstration. You can take a look at, for instance, the T5. And you'll notice the T5 is sitting in a region that is within normative range. What if that area was bilaterally inflamed and had exactly the same temperature on the right and the left? You wouldn't be able, with a horizontal analysis or this NCM, to determine if this was hyperemic. Now, that's okay because the value of dysautonomia is associated with this ability of asymmetry, which is what you're seeing on the NCM. but wouldn't it be nice to know whether you were looking at a cooled bilateral area or an overheated bilateral area? And so what you can see if we take a look here is that you might take a look on this graph and say, oh my goodness, in the cervical region, red means hot. Well, we always plot towards the warmer of the sides, but as you can tell, which is very interesting, if you look at this DTG, you can see the same area that's showing the red up in that cervical region is actually bilaterally cooler. You'll notice that the DTGs dip inwards on the right and the left, but you'll notice that it's cooler on the right, and so it's conversely warmer on the left, and as such plots to the warmer side. What do we know about cooler versus hotter? Well, we know that an active nervous system that is significantly, managing itself up is going to have a very active responsiveness, and it's going to be hyperemic. It's going to say, I've got a problem, I'm going to inflame towards it. And you can see that related in the area just below where this black one is, and you see the bluing in that area. That's a warmer area generally. As you can see on the DTGs, they're relatively neutral or normal. But we also know that vasoconstriction is a sympathetic motor response. And so we see sympathetic on the right. We see a really deep vasoconstriction on the right and a continuing vasoconstriction response on the left. So we know that this is a deeply affected, subluxated, dysautonomic area. So it's really cool to be able to look at that. And I hope that makes a lot of sense to you. If not, just listen to it again and think it through. We also have the ability to do pattern and overlay studies. This shows 3 distinct line graphs. This is taking the line graph, if you will, from the line graph that we have here from the center line, not the directs on the other side, but the center line. And what it's doing then is plotting, examination 1, examination 2, and examination 3, identifying where the person is locked in a pattern and where they are changing in their patterns. And so you need to understand that this is a beautiful view, especially if we're doing a lot of the work associated with upper cervical work. So I just wanted to show again the clumps and crescendos. You can see I'm using the same one that we showed you on the left, and you can see this crescendoing just a little bit more in this region, which is in the T10 through T12 area. And you can see the emerging crescendo that we're starting to see in and around the C2, C3 region. Just another point of view to highlight clumps and crescendos in that region. I wanted to put this in because we really put together a beautiful feature for introducing the effects of the subluxation long-term on your patients. And so embedded in the new MyInsight or the current MyInsight software is something called the NeuroLink. And the NeuroLink allows you to literally click on any of the scans. And so in this case, you would then click on where the reds or the blue bars are, or if you're going to be on a line graph, you can click right into where the segment is in the line graph. And what it allows you to do is it pops up a dual screen. And the dual screen highlights in this icon area where the symptom array that you're looking at is affiliated with the associated end organs. It's smart enough to know, that's not that smart, but it's smart enough to know which a male or a female, and that's important if you're looking at the reproductive organs. And so the outline in this case is a male. And what you can see is that we have the ability to highlight, if you take a little lower look down here, the highlighted areas are where it has been clicked. This is showing an EMG scan, but it happens, you can use it on the segmental thermals, you can use it on the rolling thermals amplitudes, and you can use it on the bar graphs of the EMG. And so it's a beautiful tool, but it doesn't stop there, because when you click on the affected organ, it opens up a next level page, which affiliates with a current abstract from chiropractic research that's affiliated with the benefits of being under active subluxation-centered chiropractic care to the resolution of symptoms and or illnesses affiliated with, patient entries. So it could do anything from learning disorders to autistic responses to, GERD, to reproductive challenges, to all of those things. And so we're continuously updating that library with the current research that affiliates with it. So it's a brilliant patient education tool that allows you to use your neurothermal to the greatest extent. So one of the things that is really important in looking at instrumentation is the ability to sync your thermal. It has a left channel and a right channel. So if you're going to be doing precision work, you want to be able to make sure that the left channel and the right channel are talking nicely to each other and one hasn't come out of sync. So the engineers and myself embedded in your software the ability for you to get a flag or a notification that you're getting a one-sided scan. This can come about by, poor acquisition. Sometimes an examiner is going too quickly. Sometimes they're not. They're tilting the thermal scanner away from the skin, so one side is shooting up into the air and it's not looking at it directly. And it's going to flag it if you get a one-sided scan. Sometimes, especially if you're going from outside to inside, from a screening environment to an internal environment, the thermal syncing can be off. These are very sensitive pieces of technology, and it sometimes can alter a little bit of the actual thermistors that are in there. And so we have a system in place to where you can sync the scan in just a moment. A rolling thermal should only be synced, however, when indicated. And many of you are thinking, oh, it's I haven't synced my system for a very long time. I should sync it. If you're not getting one-sided scans or you're not getting flags that are popping up, it's working fine. And so we have it so that there's a large bias meaning a shift that's occurred, message that's coming up. And we also have it intuitively that it sets it up that if you do have a bias, we can have it so it snaps it back and brings it your line to the center. Why would we do that? Because believe it or not, there are really sick people who are one-sided. Many times they've been involved in a toxic relationship, in other words, toxic relationship with their health, toxicity in their dietary habits, perhaps drug-induced toxicities, and you can get a very dysautonomic scan occurring. But we do want you as a clinician to know whether you need to sync the instrument and do that scan again. And so we've built it in for that. Many of you ask about it. A good sync value should never be greater than 1.09 on either right side or left side. So we're moving it into the 9/100ths of a degree to keep those instruments in sync. I bring that forward because it's your responsibility to ensure that you're getting great data, and we built that in both in the software, and now you can sync it obviously yourself in-house by yourself. So it's a lovely feature that you can do. Syncing is in the user guide, the ability to do it, and it's an exceedingly simple and set up system so you can sync the thermal on the fly when the patient is in there if you need to, and do it ahead of time. If you are getting signals or flags, make sure you do it before you're starting the next examination. So we're coming to the end, and I want to just reiterate what matters. To be relevant in practice, you need to look deeper into the nervous system. It's great to look at x-rays. It's really good to palpate. Bimanual palpation has great kappa. But the palpating the tone of the tissues around a subluxated system are really important. But you need to look deeper to remain relevant. Thermal scanning is the standard for when we're looking in interpretations affiliated with children especially. We're able to look at emerging patterns through their locked-in autistic models. Dr. Tony Ebel has done tremendous work of identifying different thermal patterning that associates with the autistic locked-in patterns. We certainly know that regionally you can take it to the end organ, as I show you in the Neuralink. We need to show the public that we aren't limited to spinal manipulative therapy as it relates to the comfort of the spine. We need to show them we have the ability to look deeper. Thermal scanning takes 25 seconds or less, and so you need to not have an excuse for not doing it. You can use it certainly associated with pre and post. You can use it in screenings if you're so inclined to get out and demonstrate the capacity of chiropractic in the public. You minimally should be doing it in initial exams and re-exams, and you can do it, as we said, in pre and post now. Thermal scanning detects dysautonomia, and dysautonomia can be symptomless, which obviously can be creating symptomless, quieted problems of asymmetry. Thermal scanning is used to detect and monitor subluxations. It's valid and reliable. and just live with that, because you need to understand that it's past all the CAPA standards that you need to go. If you do a scan on a person and you do a scan immediately after that, some of the physiological changes of rolling on the skin or getting a person in that area can cause slight changes. But if you were going back and looking at pattern and looked at that patient within another acclimation time frame, you would find that you would get excellent inter-examination reliability. Pre and post adjustments check as well as the interims. The reproducible results can be accomplished by the staff and the DCs, and you need to understand that that is clearly how most doctors operate, is to have their staff manage it. We've even given you the ability to do that standard or the basic if you feel that the examiner, could be a staff member or otherwise, isn't super skilled at the moment of getting that L1 and T1 landmark. And finally, we never stop developing. And so we're constantly creating leading edge advancements in the hardware and software. We spend a tremendous amount of time listening to chiropractors as to what they need and want in any of the technologies, but we really feel that our thermal scanner meets the greatest demandments of a chiropractic community, whether it's in the upper cervical community or in the general, family practice-based community of full spine. And we know we can meet whatever the standards that you demand from us because we have such great instrumentation. So in closing, CLA has always been a leader, but certainly in the past 5 to 7 years under my directorship, we've taken this to the next level. We've put ourselves into an online collection model. We have huge amounts of data that we continuously review and adapt. We're constantly making adaptations to the usability and the ease of reporting for you to manage it. So for those of you who are using one of the original instruments, which we call the T1, I want you to take a look at the evolutions of what associated with the new wireless thermal we call the neuroTHERMAL. I want you to go to insightcla.com. For those of you, and you can, if you're a regular user, go to Hot Deals, because there's some great pricing that's affiliated with that Hot Deal program. It means that you've watched this program. And we also know that for those of you who are interested in getting into scanning generally, we encourage you to take a look at the full suite. As you can see, the Insight is a complete wireless system. We can take a look at the full suite, but if you want to start getting into scanning, thermal scanning seems to be one of the great ways to do that. So I think that what I'd love for you to do is remember, we are always available. My name is Dr. David Fletcher. You can reach me personally at dfletcher@subluxation.com. And I hope you'll always remember that. I hope I don't have to try and spell subluxation for you. dfletcher@subluxation.com. You can visit our website at subluxation.com. The one that I've listed here is Insight CLA, so you can remember the name of it. The realities are is that we're here for chiropractors. We're a company designed by chiropractors, and we want you scanning. It's part of our mission so that we as a profession can continue to grow and show the people that with objective data, we can elevate the excellence that affiliated with all forms of chiropractic. Enjoy.